Hello, everyone. My name is Roy, your local Splatoon interview addict. And recently, there's been a little bit of discussion sparked by some data that I gathered in the Splatoon Community Census from around this time last year. The second year of that will be happening relatively soon, hopefully, if I get around to it. And in that data, we asked folks who answered to select some labels that they felt that identified their gender identity. And just to kind of lead with some interesting statistics about it, of people who responded saying that they were transgender, 53% also said they were a woman, and 13% also said they were a man. Of women who answered the survey, 48% identified as transgender, and of men who answered the survey, only 6% identified as transgender. And I thought that was really interesting, that huge disparity in the 48% of women being trans and only 6% of men. So I thought it'd be interesting to reach out to some trans masks, some trans men in the community, and see if we can talk a little bit about their unique perspective in the Splatoon community. So today I'm joined with Strings. Strings, could you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. So, hi, I'm Strings. You typically see me TOing in this scene. You can see me a lot in the low-ink help desks and FTIU, as well as some LAN work for Anarchy Nova, which is the DMB LAN, as well as doing TOing stuff. I also do occasional commentary and compete myself with my team, Death Crab for Cutie. So you see me bouncing around quite a bit in this scene, just doing various roles.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. Strings, have you noticed this disparity in the community between the number of trans masks and the number of trans femmes?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I am so incredibly used to being the only Transmasc person that like people in this community know, like are friends with. Like just yesterday when I was thinking about this, I was in a voice call with a bunch of other TOs. And as people trickled into the voice call, I was just like, "Hey, question. How many Transmasc people do you know in this scene?" And every single one of them are like, "Wait, hold on. I have to think about this." And no, I don't. Strings does not count. You have to think of someone else. So yeah, I have absolutely noticed the lack of trans masks individuals in this scene, and I'm quite used to being the only trans mask person that people talk to.
And it's not something that we're gonna directly be able to get to the bottom of. You know, we're not we're not wizards here, and it's a large demographic thing that would take like psychological, like sociological studies to look at the community and figure out these things, and even to look at like larger society and gaming spaces generally. But if you could kind of break down a little bit of the reasoning why you think that there is such a disparity between the number of trans masks in the community versus the number of trans femmes. What do you think is kind of causing that effect?
I think it is. So first off, I think it is nothing that the Splatoon community itself is doing. I think it does, in general, and especially when it comes to gaming circles, a wonderful job at being like vocally supportive of trans people. And I think that like it also includes trans masks. I think it is in general like being raised as a girl, like video games in general were never really like advertised to us so as like a thing that we could do. It was mostly a boys thing. And what I've known from like going back and thinking about like the trans masks and trans men I've known through my life, like a lot of them just were not into video games during that like core point of their life between like ages like 10 to 14. And so when they came out and realized their gender and realized like their identity and who they are as a person, they just have not bothered to go back and like go and play video games. Now, granted, I also am around like 20, I am 28, so that was around the time when I was like 8 to 10 when like the DS era of like games marketed at girls was happening. And so I thought that it was worth mentioning because for longest time, like games were just like a boys only thing. But I grew up around that time where it was like there was that push to market games towards girls, and I never was particularly interested in that kind of like the games that were marketed at me specifically growing up as a girl. Gee, I wonder why. So, so I think it is just a lot of like, just was not a hobby that like a lot of trans men like either like knew that that was something that they were allowed to get into growing up, or just like of the stuff that was marketed to them, they're like, well, that's not really something I'm interested in. And as they transition, just have not bothered to revisit. So that is my leading theory on like there aren't as many Transmasc in gaming spaces in general, and therefore probably also like Splatoon. So that's my leading theory.
I think that's like largely what I believe too. I think when you're brought up and raised as a young boy, it's so video gaming is so boycotted, and it's such a developmentally important time in your life that when you start to engage with something and also like start building the skills associated with so young, it's easier for you to continue because you've started to gain an understanding of how everything works at a young age. In the same way, like speaking a language from when you're young becomes easier because you've just always been doing it. So there's that advantage of society putting it on you young, and it's easier to stick with it because you started young, and it's not as hard to get into it at a later point. That kind of
like
no, go for it.
Yeah, like I was definitely an anomaly growing up in that like I was in those spaces. Probably some sort of like repressed like thing going on there where I was in a lot of like those like spaces. I was friends with a lot of boys growing up, and so video games as like a hobby and like as like a community in that like very crucial time in my life wasn't as like foreign to me, and I didn't feel, well, I certainly felt like girls did not belong in video games, but it felt like way less alienating to me because I was in those circles so young.
Yeah, I think there's it's also it's more common for men to be in online gaming spaces, so it makes sense that more AMAB people who would then transition to be trans femme would be in these online gaming spaces before their transition, realize they're trans, and then remain in those places after their transition.
Yeah, that does make sense.
I think it is very much just a case of society treats AMAB people in one way, and then even after they transition, they tend to stick to the same hobbies, relatively speaking, and they create their own little spaces, which makes it easier for other people who then realize that they're trans to continue to maintain that hobby rather than feeling pushed out of it because they're no longer masculine and they're no longer able to partake in it for that reason. I think it creates this there's no friction, right? It's way easier to just to continue to do it.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, like I do know like trans femme friends who have had that exact experience of like being in like a place like Splatoon where it is relatively accepting and like open towards trans people and not pushing them out, that they can like figure out who they are and feel still welcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And within your time in the Splatoon community, have you noticed that the Transmasc that you do know, do they have a different experience than the trans femmes in the community? Is there anything that you've noticed about the ways in which they interact with the community that is different than trans femmes?
I would say this is not so much a like Splatoon community thing as is we live in a society in general, but it is something that like I've seen some like microaggressions and like earlier in my transition when like my voice wasn't as deep, like I've certainly experienced is a little bit of like infantilization almost. I don't think it was like I don't think it is something that like people are like, oh well, I mean, trans masks are just like baby blue hair and pronouns like girls who are pretending. But but sometimes you kind of get like even if they don't mean it, sometimes it is the internalized transphobia that like you can kind of get from microaggressions, especially going into like voice chats. And that's kind of something that I wanted to touch on in that like when it comes to like the Transmasc experience in gaming spaces, it is so incredibly diverse because the way that like Transmasc people present and how far they are in their transition is incredibly diverse.
Of course.
Like I mentioned this on Blue Sky when like the big misogyny like discussion was going on. Like I had noticed that I gained a lot more respect like in Sendo Q when I'm queuing up alone when my voice dropped and it was in like that more tenor range rather than like the soprano and alto ranges that are more associated with feminine voices. And I didn't realize that was going on at the time, but when I stopped and thought about it, it really made me feel like kind of gross. And like, sure, I was going by he, they at the time, but like looking back at it, it was just like, did you actually like consider me a man, the man that I am? Like,
yeah.
So
go for it.
It's never anything that was like specific, like blatant transphobia that I have experienced. Thankfully, I know that there are stories of that in this community that I've like seen, but from my personal experience, it's always like the little micro things that like pile up.
Absolutely, there's so much of that. Like, it's so much easier to perpetrate it in the little ways than it is to just be an outright bigot about it, because so many people who don't realize it and are unaware of the biases that they hold just do it without knowing and without thinking. It takes a lot of like self-awareness to understand that you are still capable of treating people differently, even if you like think, oh, everyone should be equal, everyone's, you can be the most like woke brained left-wing mob person of all time, but if you're not aware of your biases and how society has molded you, you're gonna be perpetrating systems of abuse.
Yeah, like you are not immune to internalized biases. Like
Absolutely.
This also like includes like trans men, by the way.
It includes literally every person to walk the earth.
Like, exactly, like on the flip side of the coin, and the reason why like trans men and the patriarchy, it's such a like we don't fit anywhere like in a neat little box, is that like we both experience that kind of misogyny, being like assigned female in birth and being raised as a girl, and also like on being perpetuating it accidentally, having like having that experience, like at least like being a man. So it is, from my experience, just like it's the more distant that you are from experiencing that type of misogyny that non-men face, the more you need to be careful to check your own internalized misogyny, is something that like I have learned like throughout my transition.
Absolutely. And I think what you were saying with kind of noticing that people start to treat you differently when your voice dropped and you became perceived as more outwardly masculine. I've heard so many trans femmes describe the exact like opposite experience happening to them, where when their voice started to lighten because of hormones or voice training, that they noticed a difference in how they were perceived by people when they would like join spaces. Yeah, like honestly, they're like when I noticed that happening to me, because like unfortunately we live in a society and I didn't think too much of it, but when I noticed the change and like people respecting me more, I felt gross. Like it's like I just was treated kind of similar to this all of my life, and now that I've like have a taste of like, no, it's not supposed to be like that, like it made me feel like really awful and honestly angry at like the state of things. Yeah, it must have been a really strange experience to have the kind of the societal switch flip.
But yeah, I see a lot of like what goes on and like how like non-men are treated in this community, and it's just like it's like I'm at the point where in my transition where like where I am right now, it ain't about me. But like I see so much empathy of like what like people have experienced, and like in like my distant past, I've experienced similar things myself.
And Strings, what about your experience being Transmasc in the Splatoon community has made your time here unique?
Honestly, the fact that there aren't many of us here, I am so used to like being like the one Transmasc person that people know. And normally I don't think too much of it because they know like other Transmasc people like in their like daily lives, and especially like I love my team in that like I know that they have friends and family outside of Splatoon who are trans men like me, so I know that like they're chill and it's fine. But honestly, there are also some times when like the like topic of like how trans people are treated in this community, where it's like sometimes I feel it is very centered towards like non-binary people and trans femmes, and I don't think that this is like something that is done on purpose. Just something to like keep aware of, in that like when talking about like general trans issues, not trans femme specific issues, but like when the goal is to talk about like general trans issues, like hey, don't forget us.
Yeah.
We may be a small minority in things, but we do exist, and our experience is very similar, but also very different. But just keeping us in mind and keeping the language that you use to discuss these things more gender neutral and friendly towards all genders, like it goes a long way to making sure that like people are included.
Absolutely. I think even like without the Splatoon community in other online spaces, I think it's almost synonymous that the word trans means trans femme. Like oops, people jump straight to it because it's just so much more prevalent in online spaces generally. And it's become normalized that they're almost interchangeable, but it always irks me a little when I come across its usage like that.
Yeah, like it's never intentional from what I've seen.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the millisecond you say something, people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're right." Like I'm so sorry, but it's just yeah. And honestly, there are pockets of the internet that like the opposite is happening, when there is like a pocket on Tumblr for a brief period where like when it was talking about trans issues, people automatically assumed Transmasc. And the opposite was happening towards like trans femme people who are in those spaces. So I think in the Splatoon community at large, where it is definitely more trans femme people and non-binary people than Transmasc, we are in that point where like yeah, it is usually when people are like talking about trans issues, it is more likely that like Transmasc people are left excluded from that conversation. But there are pockets and communities in the internet where the opposite is true, and I think that is worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very it's something to keep in mind, because looking at the general population, I did this after I saw the census numbers, because I was looking into the gender identities of the Splatoon community broadly, just given the discussion that's been happening around misogyny and sexism. And when I saw the numbers on the number of trans femmes versus the number of trans masks, I had to like triple check it. Like I was like, is it really that extreme? 48-6? Like it's it was quite it was quite crazy to me. So I looked into it a little bit more, and even among the general population, there was some amount of conflicting data on this, because spoiler alert, like things about trans health and trans people in society isn't particularly well funded or documented.
No way.
Who would have thought? But the share of trans men and trans women in the data sets I was finding were largely equal, or like very slightly leaning towards trans femmes. like nowhere near to the degree that is seen in the Splatoon community, according to the census.
Yeah.
And it really, to me, does just seem like it's a case of just the selection bias of being in online spaces.
Honestly, I think so, because I'll be so honest, I like looked at that and I'm like, yeah, that seems about right. And didn't give it much second thought. Because I've been in like these online gaming spaces for so long, it's just like, yeah, this sounds like the right amount, like proportion that like from my experiences in other places.
Yeah.
So I didn't give it too much thought. But yeah, it is kind of interesting, because when you go into like more general trans censuses, like I think the UCLA did a particularly notable one where it was really a split between like 1/3 trans men, 1/3 trans women, and 1/3 like non-binary people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And another thing that I found interesting also, just to kind of talk about it, was the like rate at which people who answered that they were trans considered themselves non-binary, because not every trans person could consider themselves non-binary, but also not every non-binary person considered themselves trans. I always find that a really interesting distinction, because to me, part of my non-binary identity is that it is a trans identity to me, like inherently, but I don't think that's a belief that obviously it's not a belief that every non-binary person holds, because not every non-binary person will hold any belief that everyone else does.
Yeah.
But that
I
disconnect was interesting to me.
Yeah, I guess like I guess the label like of transgender means something for everybody. So that like I know for a while there like we're non-binary people, like a pocket that like did not consider themselves transgender because they just didn't feel like the label like felt like that fit them, but non-binary was perfect. So it is interesting, and I always thought of it like more like a like square is a circle. Like the trans umbrella is wholly accepting of non-binary people who choose to accept that label for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, they do exist, non-binary people who don't consider themselves trans. So it's very cool that they are included as such in the census.
Hell yeah. It was deliberately set up in a way where if you were, say, a trans man, there isn't an option that is trans man and then cis man. There is the option of saying you're man and then also saying you're transgender. So those you select them separately and completely independently. There are also people who just put transgender and didn't put anything else. They just said, "Hey, I'm trans something." You figured it out. I don't know.
Gender trans. That's it. That's the gender.
Gender, not what you'd initially think, probably.
Yeah.
I was like, honestly, go off.
Yeah.
It was definitely really interesting part of the census to look at. Strings, kind of beyond this discussion about like gender and trans people within the Splatoon community. What have you kind of been up to recently within TOing? Have you been doing anything that you'd like people to know about?
Yeah. So I got into TOing, doing stuff for IPL around like I'd say like early 2023. And it is now May 2026, and I am still doing things for IPL. I love them over there, and I am not going to be stopping doing here. I just recently joined FTIU staff, so I have been learning the ropes there and penciling on my Friday nights for helping staff that. But I have been on low-ink staff for quite a while, and I just every month it's just always a joy to like work with those folks, as well as my work with SAC, which I am the head TO of, and We're cooking something. It's been a hot minute because the schedule of like IPL tournaments has been so busy alongside NA League and all of the lands, including the one that I run. But we're cooking stuff. We have not forgotten about SAC.
You definitely sound like you're keeping yourself busy, that's for sure.
God has cursed me for my hubris, and my work is never finished.
What was it like to get a start in TOing as like an not I don't want to say underrepresented, but as a section of the Splatoon community that has very low representation, being a Transmasc?
Ooh, this is interesting because for the longest time, like, I am Transmasc, but like I wouldn't say that I am 100% trans man 100% of the time. That's the reason why I often go by he, they, or they, them pronouns more often these days. But there was a point, like early when I was doing like TOing stuff, where I would actually kind of hide the fact that I was trans and like exclusively use he, him, because like I saw how like non-men were being treated, and I was like, I don't want that target on my back. And if I like present myself as a cis man, then I am less likely to get flack in help desk for when I am telling people off for not following the rules. So that is kind of goes back to our previous discussions, but that was something that like I distinctly remember like was a choice that I had made. And I've definitely felt like more comfortable in this scene and more comfortable with who I am in this scene, that like thankfully I'm not doing that. And I'm pretty fairly open about the fact that like I'm Transmasc on my socials and just in chats with friends. So I don't feel that way anymore, but especially when I was like a young baby TO and like I was a bit nervous with everything that I was doing around me, just like learning the ropes and stuff, but that was a conscious decision that I made.
Yeah. And then has it been hard to kind of maintain that very public and not hidden persona of being like an openly Transmasc community figure?
Oh, thank goodness, not particularly. I love you, Splatoon community, for being relatively accepting of trans people. And whenever there are like blatant instances of transphobia, the community has done a very good job at like shooting that down. So I think that like knowing the community more now than when I did when I was starting out, and thankfully I feel like a lot of like the like problems with like TO harassment has gotten a lot better over the years since when I first started out. Like I'm very grateful that like I no longer feel that way, and like it's not something I talk about every day, but like when it comes up, I'm just like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm Transmasc.
Do you think being perceived as Transmasc has had any effect on how people treat you in help desk, for example, or even within like staff spaces, how new people that you might have interacted before perceive you?
That is a good question. I think there are a couple Transmasc TOs out there that I know of, and I cannot say if the like flack that they've gotten in help desk is because they are trans and not cis, but like in the back of my mind, like knowing that that was a possibility was like very much like something that I was like thinking about a lot. Thankfully, like everybody that I've been on staff with, like the new faces that I've met and like, new staff teams I've been on have been like very respectable and like have seen me as me. So shout out to your Splatoon staff teams. They're very cool.
With the like instances of misogyny or discrimination towards different groups of people like that, it can always be hard to tell sometimes because it'll never be like blatant, because if it's blatant then it's just like, oh okay, they're just a bigot, we'll ban them, but okay, bye.
Yeah, turbo ban. Goodbye.
But if it's like little disrespects thrown in there, it can be hard to tell, like, okay, sure, you're like this, but are you an asshole or are you treating me the way you are because of how you're perceiving me? Which is also an asshole thing to do, but are you an equal opportunities asshole?
Yeah, it is something that like case by case, it is difficult to like pick apart. Like, are they treating me differently because I'm trans and they see me as like a woman and not a man?
Hmm.
Or is it just like they're just like that to every TO? But I think just like as a collective, as a whole, it is hard to deny that like non-men TOs get significantly more flack when they have to enforce rules than like your cis man TOs.
Yeah, and I found it interesting earlier. You talked about like when you first started, so that you felt like people would take you more seriously if you like really doubled down and locked into, oh, I'm a man, like I use he him pronouns, like like being very straightforward in the masculine identity rather than being more true to maybe how you really felt at the time. I think that's also true for like non-binary and trans femme people who, when in spaces where they want to be taken more seriously, they're more prone to displaying themselves as masculine because they fear not being taken seriously by the people around them.
And like, man, it all ties together. Like,
Yeah.
just like patriarchal and like cis heteronormative, like society we live in, and that like people never blatantly are like that, or at least very rarely, but like it's just something that you can feel.
Mm, absolutely. It's part of like a unique part of the trans experience where because you've experienced both sides of the coin, you know and can see how people treat you differently based on their perception of you. And so you're almost like socially encouraged to use that to your advantage and to like push whatever side of you in that moment will be like a better outcome, even if it's not true to yourself. And I don't think it's fair on people. I think it pushes people to like sacrifice comfort in their own identity just to feel heard and listened to. And I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, no, and like this also like goes beyond just like trans people, like people who are like neurodivergent or like openly autistic and proud, like they also get one, like when it comes to like times like when they are in positions of authority, like they also get like flack.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, it's
So
needing to display yourself as this like cisgender heteronormative neurotypical like in quotes normal person that
mhm.
you won't feel like you're in a place you're not supposed to be, or that you're stirring the pot, or that you're rocking the boat, or that you're inconveniencing anyone by existing, and that people will take you seriously in these spaces.
Which is honestly doubly ironic considering what the game we're all doing this for is a very colorful game about like self-expression and rebellion, which honestly I think is very relatable to like queer and neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
And then yet we still have these problems in our spaces.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because it's not even necessarily like, oh, the Splatoon community is so bad. Blah, 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 blah. It's society, man. Like, it's in every
We
single
all
one
live
of
in a
us.
society. And we bring that into our spaces whether we like think to or not, which is why it's doubly important to like check those internalized biases when it comes to like how you interact with people in this scene, especially those who are different than you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much that wraps around to this idea of like knowing your own biases and knowing why you're acting the way you are, and being aware that anyone is capable of perpetrating systems of oppression and keeping people down, and even if it's not intended, even if it's just like your natural response to a situation and you're not giving it the like if you're not giving it thought, but that exact situation where you're just like letting situations happen and you're not thinking critically about the way you're acting towards others, especially in an online community setting where maybe you're a community leader, maybe you have a voice that people respect, maybe your actions have a lot of consequences in how other people are able to interact with the community. you might not realize that how you're acting and how you're engaging with the community is potentially putting other people down, and it's not being fair or equal to everyone.
Yeah, like I think you hit the nail right on the head there. And I think the best way that like people can like try and attempt to like check that about themselves and like at least open themselves to be like a more welcoming community to marginalized folks is to like, I guess just like before like you react to something like in like a serious situation, like take time to like think about what you're going to say. Cause I found that like before like I react immediately to a situation, like taking that time to think, that is when like I start thinking about like, okay, what internalized biases am I bringing to this conversation? And like, how do I respond from there, knowing that like, maybe like I'm thinking this way because of like a bias that I didn't even know that I had. That, and also you're going to slip up. Everybody slips up. Everybody is human. And like, instead of reacting like extremely defensively when somebody does bring something up to you, like being open that like it's not the end of the world when like a like really minor slip up like that happens, and like listen to the person who is like very clearly like, hey, like this made me feel this sort of way, I think will go a long way in just like, I guess just like personal development and also just like maintaining that like safer community for everybody.
Absolutely. I think it's so important that we as a community encourage people to discuss problems, to discuss conflicts, to discuss issues that come up, because the alternative to that is what we've been seeing in the Splatoon community for years now, which is like these things brew in the background and they lurk in the shadows of the community for too long until they reach a boiling point, and then it becomes this big explosion that spreads across the whole community for a whole week and everyone's talking about it, and it becomes these really big spectacle of the community. But if we just sat down with one another and we discussed our differences, if we discussed our actions and why we were behaving the way we did and took accountability for them and sought out understanding from one another, I think it would do so much to better this community.
Yeah, like it's going to be uncomfortable. Like nobody likes having those kinds of conversations between people, but like it's very necessary in order to like stop the fire from getting out of control and like letting the pot boil over into like something that will be much a bigger thing later down the line.
Absolutely. It's seeking out the discomfort now so it doesn't become just an uncontrollably messy situation for the community at large.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Strings, it's been great to sit down and get to talk to you. If you could kind of talk a little bit just before we go ahead and wrap up, if you were to give some advice maybe to some transmascs in the community right now who are maybe feeling alone, who are maybe they see the numbers, they see they look around, they don't see many other transmascs, and they might feel alone or that their voice isn't as important. What would you say to people who might be feeling like that?
Well, first of all, no, you're not crazy. There are that few transmascs in this community. Like, if you are second guessing yourself, I guarantee you, like, you are seeing things correctly. But honestly, just if there are like people build communities, like reach out to like that transmask person, you know, and like ask for a scrim, or just like say like, hey, like I really liked like the plays. I watched your stream and I really liked the plays that you were making there, and just like start up conversations with them. Like I am like in like a smaller group chat of like other transmasc people that in this community I know, and it's just a transmasc only chat, and it's just really cool to like know that like there are people like me in this community, and just like even if it's not the most active, then like we're out there and we're doing our thing and we're thriving. So I guess just like don't be afraid to like reach out to transmasc people. So few of us there are in this community. Hell, you can reach out to me, like my DMs are open. But just like no, just don't be afraid to like talk to people and build that community, because yeah, there are just not as many of us here, so it just those human connections are all the more important.
community starts with you, folks. You heard it here today.
Yep.
Strings, it's been a lovely talk. Where can the people find you if they want to reach out, if they want to see your takes, if they want to keep up with all your TO endeavors? Where can the people find you?
You can find me usually in IPL help desk somewhere, but also on Blue Sky on strings.
I guess also on Blue Sky.
Yeah. But you can also find me at my local LAN, Anarchy Nova. If you're in the DMV area, I highly recommend checking out your local LANs. And we are cooking up that next one for sure.
Oh yeah. Strings, thank you so much. Thank you so much at home for taking the time to listen to this interview. If you would want to listen to more interviews, you can find them on my channel. You can find them on the Dapple channel. You can even find them on a couple other Splatoon channels dotted around the internet. I've been Roa. Thank you so much again for taking the time. Be sure to check out more things that we got coming up for you. And I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye.